How's it going? Welcome to Chats with Spencer. My guest this week is a super meat boy speedrunner. I discovered him at the most recent Awesome Games Done Quick. He is Shredberg. I had a really fun and entertaining time talking with Shredberg and learning more about him and his love for sports, video games, and much more. Linked below is Shredberg's Awesome Games Done Quick run, so you can check out him in action. So sit back and enjoy my interview with Shredberg. All right, Shredberg, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks. So, Shredberg, I was just wondering, could you give us maybe a bit of background on yourself, maybe where you grew up, what kind of kid you were, and just like the things you were interested in?
Yeah, so I from California, sort of Sacramento area.
Okay.
For basically like I'm 28. For 25 years of that, I've been in the Sacramento area. Lived in Georgia for a couple of years, and then up like way in Northern California for like a few months, but mostly Sacramento area, which is great. I really like it here. Great weather, close to a lot of stuff. Really good food. Um, as a kid growing up, always loved Mario and Nintendo games.
Okay.
Um, I remember I was like 2 years old, 3 years old, and my mom was playing through Super Mario Bros. 3, and she was on Bowser, and I was like, oh my goodness, I've never seen anybody like beat a video game before. So it was one of those things where I was like chasing that like as much as I could. As a kid, would always play like GoldenEye and stuff with my brother, a lot of N64 stuff. So a lot of that, like, really enjoyed always watching sports, playing sports. Big baseball fan, go Giants. Big basketball fan, go Kings. Um, yeah, and so really in like 2012, really in like 2008, I saw like some of the first like speedrun content I've ever seen. Like I remember watching, it was there was a Super Mario 64 video where it was like, oh, you can beat Super Mario 64 with only 16 stars. I'm like, what? No way. And so I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I was like, oh, you can beat it with 1 star and 0 stars. Like, oh, that's crazy. And like, that's all I thought that was. I didn't know there was a community behind it really. And then like, I remember it was SGDQ or AGDQ 2012. I remember watching the whole thing and being like, oh, so like speedrunning isn't just like somebody decided to play it again one day, but their goal was to go fast. Like they have to practice this and like do crazy stuff. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'll try a speed on my own. And it didn't go super well. I was like, oh, okay, I'm not as good as those people. And a few years later, I was like, I'm going to try speedrunning for myself, which I did. And I was like, okay, I actually finally had an understanding that it's really just like put a crap ton amount of time into it, and then you'll do well. So I've been doing that for the past 3 years, and that's super cool. But also I'm super into music. I've been listening to, I before, all the COVID shutdown things where I would go to a show like once a month at least.
Okay.
When I was in college, I would go down to San Francisco like once a week almost to go to them, which is like an hour and a half drive. It was always the worst when a show would go to midnight because it was just one of those things where it's like, crap, now I'm not going to go to sleep till 2 a.m. But love that. Can't wait to go back to those. Yeah, that's sort of the rundown of me.
You kind of touched upon it, but just in regards to your video game story, you just said, yeah, you saw your mom playing Super Mario 3, but like what consoles did you grow up playing? What do you remember, like the first game you really like you yourself played and were like really in love with, that kind of thing?
The first game that I really liked, so I had a Super Nintendo when I was like 3 or 4, and I played a decent amount of Super Mario Bros. All Stars, but not like a ton. It was one of those where I probably played through the first few worlds of Super Mario, all of those games. But we got an N64 when I was like 5 and would play a lot of Super Mario 64. And so that's probably the first game. And one really interesting thing was that like I had the kind of thing where like I wouldn't play necessarily like every single day back to back, or at least the same game. So I would go be like, oh, okay, I have like 50 stars here, but I don't, it's been a few weeks. I need to restart this. So then since I already knew what I was doing, like I felt like I was like, okay, I can just do this faster. And I felt like that sort of is like got the mentality of like,
Yeah.
hey, it's fun to try to beat things super fast, which I think is interesting. But yeah, Super Mario 64 is definitely, I think it's one of the best, like greatest games of all time. It's just super well designed, super fun, great mechanics, super fun to go back to as well. Really love that. So that's probably the first game that I like fell in love with, but also played like the game that I probably played the most in my entire life is like MLB The Show 07, because I had like I had a PS2. I didn't want to upgrade to a PS3. And so I just played that game every night just before I went to sleep for like an hour. I think my career mode, I would play like every single game, and I had like 24 seasons in it at like 2012 before like I just finally was like, you know what, I think I'm done with this. But I had probably like 2,000 hours in that game, like an insane amount for a sports game for a baseball game that you don't really like. I never really played with other people. It was just like the geeking out of like, as if like, you know, getting to sort of like role play myself in a baseball game. And now there's like baseball manager and like football manager and all that stuff, which is like more, I think, of what I actually want. And so I love to do those because you just get to like pretend like you're a GM, and that's a lot of fun. But definitely played a lot of MLB The Show.
All right. Just in regards to music, this is a question I ask people is, what's the song from your childhood that you just have a very vivid memory of? Maybe it's a song your parents played, something you heard on the radio.
I don't know the name of the song, but it's one of them by Bare Naked Ladies. It's the song that's in, I think it's called is the name of the song. It's in, what's the name of that song? Dumb and Dumber, movie Dumb and Dumber.
Okay, I'll look it up for that.
Yes, I believe it's called but I remember my parents had the Bare Naked Ladies CD, and whenever we would go on any sort of drive that was longer than like 15 minutes, that CD was on, and so I'd hear that song in particular. So I didn't know that that was like a song that really brought me back to childhood until I watched Dumb and Dumber a few years ago. I'm like, man, that's that song. I love this song. Even though I've never listened to Bare Naked Lady, or not Bare Naked Ladies, Crash Test Dummies. I think I said the wrong band.
That's okay.
Times there. Crash Test Dummies.
Crash Test Dummies. Okay.
Yes. And yeah, that song is like a nostalgia trip.
And just on a similar vein, do you remember the first album you ever bought or asked for? Or
yeah, it was Eiffel 65 who made. Yeah, of course they made the anthem Blue, which was great. It was Eiffel 65. I really wanted the whole thing. And there's a couple of jams on that album. I'm not going to lie. Not really my music. It's like, I'm not really into like electronic music.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I just knew I liked the song Blue. And so I asked my parents for it, and they were like, sure, why not? You can have Eiffel 65. Yeah, interesting album. And the one that the first one that I actually bought with like my own money was, I remember it was, a stereo something. They had the song Walkie Talkie Man, which was really good. I think they're out of like New Zealand or something, this like pop punky like power pop band from the mid 2000s. But really they had a really good album. And then Motion City Soundtrack is another one that was the first one where I like was a band I bought multiple albums of because I just like fell in love with.
All right, this is a question about speedrunning in the sense of, if you could introduce speedrunning to anybody who doesn't speedrun, and it doesn't necessarily have to be for a game you play, but just like the whole idea of speedrunning and bringing them into the community and getting them to speedrun a game of their choice, who would you choose to bring in?
Like what person would I bring in to make a speedrunner?
Yeah, like you think maybe like they'd be a good speedrunner, or they just might be like really into it, that kind of thing.
Oof. That's a good question. I think that like one thing that I really like watching is like IGN's done, like there was a video of, it was for Sonic the Hedgehog when the movie came out. They got the actor who voiced Sonic to watch a speed run. And so obviously there's like, they were an actor, so their interest in it was, you know, they're trying to promote a movie. But I do think that there's a lot of actors who I think would like, it could get really into it. You know what I mean? Like there's you hear like Brie Larson and who are some other ones, like the Giants player Hunter Pence is super into video games and people like that. I think that, you know, you can get like Hunter Pence seems like there will be my answer. Hunter Pence seems like a super competitive guy, really great baseball player. I think you get that guy, you tell him here's your favorite game. I bet you can't beat that game in like, you know, 2 hours. I bet you that could drive them into it. And then you just do it again. It's like, I bet you can't beat that time. And that's like the core of speedrunning, right? Like a lot of people, especially like in the more early days, right now, there's like, doesn't matter the game, there's like a community for it. But back in like 2013, I remember watching streams where people would just be like, okay, let's find a random Super Nintendo game and like I'll do a run and then you can do a run, or maybe they just raced it at the same time. And so I think that if you did that with like just about anybody, I think that you can sort of get them to understand why it's so cool. Is that like, yeah, world record and top times is cool, but what's really cool about it is just like you're replaying your favorite game, but you're not it's not taking you multiple days or weeks to do it, and you're discovering like so much more about what makes the game what it is. So like I think that if you get someone like super competitive like a Hunter Pence, like a baseball player, sports player into it, I think you could. And one thing too is that I'm just remembering there's like a pitcher for the White Sox, and they follow, there's a YouTuber, Summoning Salt, pretty well known for making world record progression videos, and like they on Twitter were like, Summoning Salt is the GOAT, greatest of all time. And I'm like, dude, I really think that you can get a lot of these sports people to be like into speedrunning if they just tried it.
And I just think as just like, even if you've played a video game in the past, and for me, I think the biggest thing that got me into speedrunning is seeing a game you played get demolished.
Yeah.
You're just like, what the hell just happened?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's crazy when it's like, even if the game has crazy glitches, you're like, what just happened? Even if it doesn't have crazy glitches, you're like, how did they do that all in a row? That's crazy.
Exactly.
Even when you speedrun for years, that stuff still blows you away.
Shredberg, do you have a personal sporting memory that maybe you can share with us? Just think about it's just maybe a championship game, a game you just played well in.
There's definitely, so I don't know, it was probably when I was like 11 years old. I remember it was Little League. I was on the Mets playing baseball. It was a close game the whole time, but I was playing very well. I was like 3 for 3 before that, had like 2 doubles, hit in like 6 of our 8 runs so far. But we were down by 2 runs and the bases were loaded. I was like on deck, and the person going before me was like, they had improved a lot, but they obviously were like out of practice for whatever. I mean, they're like, we're 11 years old. No one's really, it's his Little League. We're not trying to be the best here. But he was super nervous. I'm like, dude, just don't worry about it. That pitcher up there is going to be more nervous than you. And he's like, okay. I'm like, if you're just don't want to, just don't swing. Just try to not strike out. That's like the only thing you need to do. And he's like, okay. And so he goes up there and he gets like 4 pitches and they're all walks. And so now I'm up there and where the score's like tied or we're down by 1 or something. Yeah. And I go and I knock in like the rest of the runs. It was like super exciting. The only time in my life I've ever been part of a game where it was like walk-off hit. It was super, super fun. And plus just that whole game I was playing well. It was really cool. It was like the first game of the season too. So I felt like indestructible. Like this was going to be me the rest of the season. It didn't work out like that, but for that day, it seemed like it was going to.
What position did you play?
I played like second base or third base. In general. So second base for a lot of it, because I never had like super strong of an arm, but which you need for third base.
Yes, for sure.
So second base a lot, but third base sometimes. I had a very good skill of just like not having ground balls get past me, which is pretty important for that. So that was good. But again, like my throwing was never excellent, but was always infielder.
Right, Shredberg, if you could visit any time period throughout history, prehistory, and you're in a bubble, you're invisible, but you can observe what's going on, where do you go and why?
That's a good question. I really want to know like ancient Rome, because they seemed like they had their stuff together. They seemed like they really had, like, I want to know what the average everyday life thing sort of was like for them. They had a lot of technology, and they had like seemingly like really well running infrastructure. I just want to know how that's like. And like the biggest thing is I just want to know what like the everyday life was for somebody back then, or like really any time period, to be honest with you. One of the things I think is really interesting is like when you go on vacation somewhere too, you're sort of putting yourself into a bubble of that. But there's people when you go on vacation who their everyday life is wherever you're going to, or like or somewhere like in the middle of like Nebraska, right? I don't have that their experience for that. And I've always wanted to like experience other people's lives in a way like that. I think that'd be really interesting, but especially like something like ancient Rome seems really cool, of like even going to a bubble just to like experience what they experienced every day. I think would be like, I want to know what people's experiences were, what drove them to happiness, because it's different. Like even nowadays, it's different from person to person. I just wonder how much it's different for people thousands of years ago.
And as a sports fan, I'm going to ask you this. You can go back in time and witness any game in history, any sport, and you're going to witness it, but you're not going to know what happens. So it's like...
Okay. Let me think. That's a good one. Because if I knew what happened, I would go back to the 2002 Western Conference Finals and do something to stop Game 6 from being rigged. But anyways, probably to relive like one moment, probably Game 7 of the 2014 World Series.
Okay.
This was one where it was like the end of the Giants, like 3 World Series in 5 years kind of thing. And going into Game 7, people were talking about whether the pitcher Madison Bumgarner was going to throw, because of all the Giants pitchers, he was the only one who was consistent at the time. Like the rest of their rotation was hurt or just playing really poorly. So the Giants seemed like if they could just get ahead early, like that was their game. And that's exactly what happened. And Madison Bumgarner threw like one of the best games of all time. It was awesome. He came in relief in the 4th inning, and then just after giving up like 1 hit, retired 13 straight batters until like the very end, which there ended up at the very end being like a runner on 3rd with 2 outs where the Giants were only up by 1 kind of thing. So it came down to the very end. Super exciting moment. I'd go back to then for sure.
All right, Shredberg, we're going to switch pace a little bit, just slightly less in-depth questions, but if you want to elaborate 100%, just please stop me.
Sure.
What's your favorite sports team?
Favorite sports team is probably the Sacramento Kings. NBA basketball, basketball is just a lot easier to follow than baseball because there's not a game every single day. So it lets me do it. Also basketball, just on a game to game basis, seems to be a lot more fun. Plus I could, like in 2019, early 2020, I was going to like most of the home games. So that's always super fun. So when you're able to attend games, it's always the best.
Cats or dogs?
Oh, dogs for sure. By far. I don't have anything against cats, but dogs are just better. That's
fair. Spring or fall?
Fall, because spring gives me really terrible allergies. They're both great, but no allergies in fall. So
yeah, well, that's fair. M&Ms or Skittles?
Peanut M&Ms.
Okay.
If it's not peanut M&Ms, then Skittles.
Okay. Just one of your favorite movies.
Okay. Back to the Future. Just like one of the most watchable movies ever. Super exciting, super fun.
If your next meal could be anything in the world, what would it be?
Ooh. Probably like some lobster tail and like Brussels sprouts or asparagus or something. Ooh, probably that.
When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be an astronaut, which is very typical, but I really wanted to be an astronaut.
What's your go-to snack at a convenience store?
Salt and vinegar chips. Hopefully they're like as sour as possible. Like Cape Cod chips, if they have them. Those are the best salt and vinegar chips out there.
Favorite childhood TV show?
SpongeBob for sure. SpongeBob was great. I would watch SpongeBob no matter what.
Favorite video games of all time, and you can list a few.
Super Mario 64, Super Mario Galaxy, Final Fantasy X, Xenoblade Chronicles. Those are probably the big ones that I would like have to say. I speedrun Super Meat Boy, so you think that would be there, but honestly, like that was probably top 10, but
okay.
it's surprisingly not. And it's almost like some of my favorite games, I'd rather keep them not in speedrunning, because you sort of get irritated with the games that you speedrun.
Yeah. Well, that's fair.
Yeah.
Best video game storyline?
Xenoblade Chronicles. It's like I'm not a huge anime fan. I'll
Okay.
watch plenty, but that is like watching or playing through a really good anime. Like it's got a good story. There's constantly something happening. Um, really well told, great characters, a lot of fun. It's like the best parts of anime that I wish just like every anime was.
Mhm.
But in a game that has really good, mechanics. So it's a really good story. Final Fantasy X
Best.
is also pretty
Oh
close.
yes. And best soundtrack.
Final Fantasy X, really good.
All right.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's funny. So many people who I've talked to them, speedrunners, just like different people. Final Fantasy X. I thought it is way more popular than I thought. I love the game. Like personally speaking, it's my favorite Final Fantasy, like by far, and one of my top games as well. But yes, the music in that to Xanarkin to this day
Oh, it's so good.
hits
And
hard. Like
oh yeah. That's too is a soundtrack that like when I'm working or doing something I'll just put on because it's like
mm,
perfect background music.
mm,
Like every track's good and it's got like those motifs that it shares over all of the
yes.
different tracks. That's just
Mm.
like no matter what, it sounds familiar to you. Which is really cool because it builds that world. And just listening to the soundtrack, it's almost as good as going back to replay the game.
Yes. What's the best speed run you've ever witnessed? This could be in real life and just like in general.
The best speed run I've ever witnessed. That's a good question. Um, I think one of man, let me think because it's a super broad question. Like there's so many good speed runs that
Mm-hmm.
I've seen. Like I know that a super hype one was like the Celeste's first sub 30 by
Okay.
TGH. That was super cool. Because that was one where like it was like a meme that it'll like never happen. People knew that it would happen, but it was one of those where it was like at the time seemed like it was just impossible. And now it's cut by like 3-4 minutes, which is crazy. But at the time it was crazy. Every 106 world record that I've seen by Mate in Super Meat Boy is
Okay.
is crazy. That the run is um, it is insane the amount of precision that run takes. It's hard to explain just how much that speed run takes in terms of practice and just it's insane. There's like 40 deaths in it, and I think like 30 of them are unintended, which sounds like a lot,
Mm.
but it's not. That's a
Mm.
hard game, and the stress that you're doing, like you expect to die, kind of thing. It's an insane speed run. So those are two that really come to mind.
So I was going to ask you who would your dream starting nine be for baseball, but since you mentioned basketball, it's probably an
Okay,
easier question to answer. Who's your
sure.
top your dream starting five? And I'm not going
My
to limit you by position.
Okay, my dream starting five. Okay, well, so I'll put in there, even though he's definitely not the best small forward ever, but Peja Stojakovic is going to be the
Kings,
starting
come on,
small
yeah.
forward. Yeah, he's great. Best shooter of all time. You For point guard, I think you gotta have. I think I'd put Magic Johnson in there just because it's
Yeah.
almost like a
Mhm.
cheat because he's just like really good at at every position. He can
Mm-mm.
he can do whatever on the floor. Uh, you know, Shooting guard, I think you got to put in Michael Jordan there. That one's
Mhm.
easy. Best of all time. And then I think I'll put in Duncan for power forward.
Oh yeah.
I feel like he's almost underrated how good
He
he
is
was.
completely
He would
underrated.
just
Yeah.
take over games. He's so good at defense, and like he's one of those players that would like put up like 25 points, 15 rebounds, 3 blocks, and it's almost like, oh, he did do that, didn't he? Because it was almost silent
Mm.
because he
Mm.
never did anything flashy. It was just he would take over games, and he always like made his teammates better. So he was always really good. And then at center, probably Shaquille O'Neal. He's one of those where, as a Kings fan, it was
You're
big
just like, why?
rivalry with him. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just hate it. It was the worst. It was like they get it to Shaq, and it's just like, here's 2 more points. I hate this
Mm.
kind of thing. So same thing with Kobe Bryant. He would be in there too if I didn't put Peja in there. Although he's not
Okay.
really a small forward, but he can go in there. We can play small ball.
Yeah.
It's 2021. We could do that.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
unfortunately, Kobe is not in the lineup this time.
Mm.
So that's probably my starting five.
And just as a follow up, who are some of the players you enjoy in the current NBA?
in the current NBA, that's a good question. Luka Doncic is probably my favorite.
Okay.
As a Kings fan, there's like a whole story behind it where the Kings should have drafted him, but they didn't. But he's still a super fun player to watch. I think he's super exciting because he's one of those players who can play all over the floor. Steph Curry's one of those players where like I remember watching him in college when he was at Davidson, and I was like, this guy is so good. Whoever drafts him is going to be like so happy with it because he's one of these like small players. I think he had like an injury in college too.
Okay.
That sort of made him drop down a little bit, but I was like, whoever drafts him are going to be so happy. I didn't think he was going to be like, I think like top 2, top 3 player in the NBA. I think sometimes people think that the gap between like LeBron and Curry is like this, and like at a minimum it's like this. He's so good, and the ability to shoot a 3 from literally anywhere is, I think, a lot more powerful than being able to drive and score, just because 3 points is more efficient than 2 points. So Steph Curry is super exciting to watch. Anybody who can shoot a 3 like consistently from 40 feet is
it's
insane.
Unreal.
Yeah.
Okay, so Shredberg, what are the things about speedrunning that like drive you towards it and like keep you going?
I think that with speedrunning, a lot of it is just a self-improvement kind of thing. There's a real excitement of having these. There's a very noticeable amount of improvement that you're able to see where you just do it, and it's a lot easier to do than say like, oh, I'm going to run 3 miles and I'm going to time myself and get faster, because you don't get as physically exhausted. So it's easier. I would imagine though, for people who have done like, track and field or anything like that, when they get a better time than they've ever gotten, there's an excitement towards it. And it's like that, but with something else that you already enjoy, video games. So this idea that you have this self-improvement, I think this is a really big drive. And as long as you have the time to do it, I think it's super exciting. Like when I first started speedrunning Super Meat Boy 90%, one of my first goal was under 25 minutes. And I got that within a couple of weeks. I was like, okay, I'll do under 22 minutes. And I remember at the time someone was like, oh, would you ever try for like, the time that I have now? I'm like, I'll never be able to get that. I'm just not good enough to do that. And it's one of those mindsets that is, if you just get rid of that mindset of like, I don't think I can do that, you can do it. And it's one of those things that I think speedrunning really gives you, or at least gives me, is this idea that you can do maybe not anything that you set your mind to, but you can notice yourself improve and do things that you didn't think you would be able to do. And there's a very when you improve, you get a faster time, and it's very like noticeable that, hey, you're better than you were before. And that's really cool. And so that's probably the coolest thing about speedrunning to me, that keeps me coming back. As well as just being able to play your favorite games over and over. It's just so fun. But the self-improvement part, I think, is really what brings people to it, is the ability to see themselves get better at something.
And I just have to ask, in regards to why Super Meat Boy, it just seems, I mean, I think it's, as a viewer, I think it's an amazing experience where you have that, like, your heart stops for a second when you make like a precise move and whatnot, but it seems like a very punishing game at the same time. So how did you kind of like choose that? 2
things on that. How I got it was, I actually wanted to speedrun for a long time. But I just didn't think I was that great. But it was like, I even tried to speedrun The Last of Us in 2015. Actually did do a couple runs of that. It just wasn't my thing. It wasn't super fun. I don't have any recordings of it, unfortunately. But I got like decent times. I think a lot of it had to do with the category I did. Wasn't very exciting. It was like a new game plus all the glitches for it. And it's kind of not as exciting as they would want it to be. But I was watching AGDQ 2018. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm just going to speedrun something. And Super Meat Boy had come out on Switch like a few days after that ended. So I was like, okay, I'm going to speedrun this. I like this speedrun. I've loved watching the speedrun. I'm just going to do it. And so I liked it and I stuck with it. And that's pretty much why. And it's one of those games where I keep coming. I've speedrun a lot of games and then just dropped them, because Super Meat Boy, what is so good about it, and this goes to my second point to it, is it's like, oh, it's punishing because you're going to die a lot. And that sounds really, on the outside, that sounds really frustrating. That's like, oh, you're guaranteed to die, basically. It's actually super liberating, because you're guaranteed you're going to die. You're always going to have a mistake. So you don't have to have a perfect speed run because it's never going to happen. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
It's never going to happen. You're never going to have the perfect speed run. The world record right now has 2 deaths.
Okay.
But their end game was just amazing. There's as much time save there as like you want there to be. No one's ever going to have a perfect speed run of that. And because of that, you always have room for improvement. And because of that, you're always going to have the drive to do better. There's, a lot of speed games, it's just like, okay, well, you're going to go up to this and you're going to have like it's a super hard frame perfect trick. And if you don't get that, you lose a minute. So that's the end of your run. There's nothing like that in Super Meat Boy. There is like, oh, you had a death here. That's going to cost you 10 seconds. In any percent, legitimately, 10 seconds is one of the longer deaths you can have. And for speedrunning, that's really, honestly, 10 seconds is a lot, but there's a lot of games that have deaths that are like 3 minutes long, where it's legitimately the end. Super Meat Boy, it does not matter what mistake you make. You can finish your run and you can get a PB with it, with a death, with 2 deaths. It doesn't matter. So worrying about dying is like inconsequential to just moving fast and, executing. It's one of those things where a lot of new runners will be like, oh, I need to get my death count down. It's like, dude, don't even look at your death count. It literally doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is, if you keep dying to a single trick, like stop doing that trick because you're just losing time with it. But at the same time, like, as long as you are saving time doing something, it doesn't matter if you die to it 25% of the time. If you're saving time on average, do it. Go for it. You don't need to do anything. At the same time, if you want to go for a deathless run, okay, you're probably not going to world record, but like, go for it. It sounds like fun.
A very interesting perspective. I wouldn't have thought it that way, where it's like you said, on the outside, it's like, oh, you die a lot.
Yeah.
But so just wondering, in regards to you did the Chrono Relief, and then you just recently did AGDQ. How was that? That's like the biggest stage of speedrunning, right? Like, you don't get bigger than that. How was that?
It was those were super cool. It's one of those things where AGDQ definitely got me into speedrunning way back when, and it was something that I've always wanted to do. So like, getting into the first one was the Chrono Relief one, which is like a smaller marathon, which actually was a little bit more surprised that I got into that one because it's a 3-day event. And I thought like, okay, in my time with 106 is like, it's a great time. Don't get me wrong. But there's like, it's like my PB right now is like 9 minutes off world record. But again, that world record's insane. I'm like only 4 minutes off of second place, which to just give into perspective, there's a 5-minute gap between first and second. That's how crazy that one is. But getting in there, I was like, oh man. And there's like a little bit of like imposter syndrome when it comes to that too. It's like, oh man. And just getting into an event like that, I think really helps you like be like, oh no, you're a real speedrunner, which is something that people talk about all the time, where it's like, oh man, I'm not a real speedrunner like them. But being a real speedrunner just means that you are playing the game and you put a timer against it. That's all you need to do. And so it was a really cool experience. It was really fun. I hope one day that I can do a GDQ event that's in front of people. Yes. Obviously because of coronavirus, these had to be online, a little bit different. But at the same time, super fun. People reaching out to me saying that they loved my run was really cool. I really always appreciate it when people did that. A lot of people just giving feedback and support, which was really cool. And just all in all, it's just fun to share something that you've spent, thousands of hours on for people. So that, especially for a good cause, I was a little bit worried with AGDQ with, the pandemic. People might not donate as much, but people are always super giving when they can be. And so that's awesome.
I think one of the great things about your run is just the fact that, you're commentating as you're doing your run, and not to say like people don't do that, but just for me in my head to think, oh, I'm doing this super precise platforming while simultaneously explaining it to the layman. It's just like, okay.
Yeah. One of the first marathons that I did was event Calithon. So it's a California-based speedrun event. And I did any percent for it. And I remember I watched the VOD later with some people, and in the chat was on the side of it. And someone was like, this guy is commentating and speedrunning at the same time. His brain power must be enormous. And it's like, this is the best compliment I've ever gotten. My brain power is enormous. Yes. It's really one of those things where, like, if you just are talking and doing it every single day, it's not as big of a deal as you think it is. There definitely is a need sometimes to not talk and like fully
Yes.
focus, but at the same time, like, it's a marathon. You don't need to
Yes.
play the best ever. And commentating is important. And it's just one of those where, um, again, if you do it every day, like when you're streaming,
Yes.
it becomes easier. But yeah, it's definitely, I guess, a talent that I sometimes don't realize is a talent.
Shredberg, is there something you know now that you wish you knew when you were younger?
Something I know now that I didn't. Hmm.
Like, it
Let
doesn't have to
me.
be anything big. It could just be something super small.
Sure. Um, I really think the biggest thing that I wish that I knew when I was a kid was like, I everything that I did was sort of to sort of set myself up to doing whatever I was going to do when I was an adult, which was fine. But like,
Hmm.
I like when I was going through school, I worked like 30, 40 hours a week every single
Hmm.
week kind of thing. And it's almost like, and that's stuff fine. Like I wouldn't redo any of it, but it's like a lot of that stuff I'm not gonna remember that. But like all the times I spent with friends and all of that stuff, that's way more important than,
Yes.
whatever else. So if I even like, I'm not saying I would have taken like a year off of school to do stuff, but like I had friends who would do that, and I'd be like, why are you doing that? You're wasting your time. But that stuff's not a waste of time. Life's not about going and getting the next job that you're gonna get or whatever, or making money. Like that's none of that stuff's all that important. Like obviously you need to have money to survive. So a
True.
little bit of a privileged perspective in that
Hmm.
in that way. But like if you have the ability to just, take some time and just do whatever you want to do, go travel, go do whatever, like do it, and don't let anybody tell you that it's a waste of time, or you need to do this or you need to do that. Like colleges will still exist in five
Yes.
years.
Hmm.
Um, but at the same time, you might not have the same freedoms that you do now.
Yes.
So always, just don't take that kind of stuff for granted, I guess, is one thing that as a kid, again, don't regret any choices that I've made in my life kind of thing. I wouldn't redo anything, but I just wish that I had that perspective more.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was kind of the same mentality as you, Shredberg, where I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to secondary, post secondary school,
Yeah.
do do that, get your degree, get a job, whatever. But once you start working, you understand you don't really have that freedom anymore, right? You
Yeah.
can't
And
just
it's also kind of like, now what?
hmm.
You
Hmm.
went through school, and like going through school and getting a degree and then getting a job is all like, those are the steps. And then you hit
Hmm.
that and you're like, well, I mean,
Yeah, for
I
what?
could get a promotion here,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that's not like as cut and dry as like go to school for 4 years to get your degree. Um, and at the same time, like if I got that job at 23 versus 27, like
Yeah, it's not.
no one
It's
knows the difference. No one cares
hmm.
about the
Hmm.
difference. As long
Hmm.
as you get there, that's all that
Yes.
matters.
Yeah. Is there something you'd like to achieve in your lifetime, and it does not need to be limited to speedrunning?
Something I want to accomplish. It's interesting because I've never, like, the really only big goal that I had in my life was to get, like, I have a degree in mechanical engineering, and
Okay.
so that was a big thing. But since then, I haven't really had like a big goal outside of speedrunning.
Hmm.
I want to have like a family and kids someday, but
Hmm.
as most people do. But really, I think that speedrunning as of itself is like the ability to give you a goal when maybe
Okay.
you're just your day-to-day life is doing something. I don't have like a lot of places where I like, oh, I need to go see,
Hmm.
the Great Wall of China before I die. Like I want to do
Okay.
that, but
Hmm.
it's nothing that where it's like, this is something that I need to do. So
Okay.
like, I don't know if I have like a one goal, but I do know that one thing that's nice about speedrunning is the ability to like give yourself a long-term goal when otherwise you might just be living your life day to day. And I think that's really cool.
And finally, do you have any words of wisdom you try to live by, or is there just a saying you enjoy?
I don't necessarily have a saying, but really I just try to treat, I think that you should live every day trying to make the world a better place, which is
Mm.
very much like a pretty cliche thing. But at the end of the day, I do think that a lot of people, and myself included, sometimes don't do that. It's really easy to be very self-centered and self-focused, where it's like, who cares if I go and I do this? Like, even if it's bad for the environment, or if you're not doing, like, you don't need to go to like go to a homeless shelter every single weekend to make the world a better place, but it doesn't hurt to do it. You should do
Yeah.
that too. So it's really one of those where, like, on a day-to-day basis, you can help the world by a number of small things. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not a vegetarian or vegan, but I do try to, reduce the amount of meat that I eat. And I'm trying to do that more and more. Just stuff like that is something that I try to do, is just find different ways to help to make the world a better place. And, no one's going to ever be perfect at it. I certainly am not perfect at it, but, it's just one of those where if you try your best every single day, and if everybody did that, let everybody try to live that way. You don't care what is happening with other people, just try to make the world better for them. Then at the end of the day, a lot of the issues that we have right now would honestly be gone. There still would be issues, but as long as you try to make the world better for everybody else, 99% of the issues would go away.
I cannot agree more. Shredberg, where can we find you on Twitch, YouTube, and any other social media?
On Twitch, you can find me on twitch.tv/Shredberg. You can also go to shredberg.com, and it redirects you there. Maybe one day that'll be a real website. Right now, no. You can also go to my Twitter at twitter.com/Shredberg. I do have a YouTube. I think it's just youtube.com/c/Shredberg, but I don't know. I've never actually used that, but I'm sure you can search Shredberg.
I'll put the right one in.
Cool. I'm trying to actually get more videos on YouTube, but I have like it's like a perfectionist mindset where all the videos I want to put on YouTube, I want it to be like perfect. And I'm not great at video editing yet. So it's a little bit of a challenge there, but I'm trying to upload a lot more videos.
Any upcoming projects, maybe marathons coming up?
No marathons or anything like that, but I have some really cool videos for YouTube that I plan on getting out in the coming weeks. So those will be cool. Look out for those, but no marathons or anything. I'll be doing a lot of 106% speed runs on my Twitch. So always doing that, trying to get down to like a 116, 117 level on there. And hopefully I can get some really cool times in that category.
Awesome. Well, Shredberg, thank you so much for joining me. I had a blast learning about you. It's just one of these things with these interviews. You don't know, like, I see you as a speedrunner, but, I don't know all this background, but it's really cool hearing about your sports background. And I don't know, I just connect, like, the things you said resonated with me. So thanks so much for sharing your story with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for new videos every Tuesday and Friday. Check out Shredberg playing Super Meat Boy. If you have never watched speedrunning, or if you've never watched Super Meat Boy, I guarantee you're going to be entertained watching this man play Super Meat Boy. It's quite the experience. Anyways, everyone, take care, and I'll see you next video.